So let's also find a challenge. Now, before we had this box where we randomly resized. So how about this time we are going to use the slider to actually resize the box. So let's go back in here. Let's just say, let's change the label to something like magic box. Maybe we can just give the text, make it a little bit bigger. That was too big. Okay. But that's not really the important part. What we now need is an actual element that we can resize. So let's add one to our layout. For a starter, let's give this some initial size. Let's again say 100 by 100 and give it something that we can actually see it. And now it would be nice to have them sort of more centered here. So let's choose our container. Let's go to align, center, center. And now we can see our slider is not allowed to stretch anymore. That's why it shrinks down to basically nothing. So let's also go to the slider and say we want it to have a width of, not 80 pixels, I'm sorry. 80%, much better. And now the last thing that we have to do is to separate those things a little bit with a bottom margin. And I think, yeah, that looks quite nice. So now let's clean this up just a little bit. We don't need the debugger for now. Let's save it. And now we have to go into our folder, and I've already created some skeleton script sort of here. Let's jump into it. And again, as always, our basic setup, we get our root element, we initialize or query for the elements that we are going to need. This time it's going to be the box and the slider. We just have to make sure that we actually named those elements correctly. Let's just go back for a second. And let's see, my slider is okay, but we did not call this thing box. Now it should work. And now how to actually find out what the slider value is, or how to actually react to the slider being changed or being dragged around. And now for that, one thing that we can do is we can register a callback. And don't worry, we will have a section on UI Toolkit events and different sorts of events later, so this will be covered deeper. But for now, let's just accept that we sort of found that in the documentation or somewhere, and we know that what you can do with certain kinds of elements, you can not only do this with elements, but some elements have some interface that is reacting to changes when values change. And we saw before already in the UI Builder that the slider has a value property. And so what we can do is we can register a change event. We would have to know that the value was a float, but you could check that in the documentation or just believe me. And now we can say our callback will be called on slider changed, for example. This doesn't matter, you can call this however you want. The only thing is that you then have to provide a function that is having the same name. Whoops. And this time you can see when we create the function, it's still throwing an error, because this time, as opposed to the thing that we did with the button, we actually need a parameter here, and that is just this event that we defined above. And now obviously we need a way to get the value that we actually set. And now in a, I don't know, more traditional, traditional system, UI system, or things that you might be used to, you would have to sort of, get the slider and then access its value. Now the nice thing here with things like those change events is that basically this event is already containing this new information, and that's very simple. You just have to get the new value property on the event. You also have a old value or some, like, I don't know, value before or something like that. So you can always see what was the value before this thing was touched and what is the value now. And we are going to utilize that to set the width, just as we did before. And we will just do event.newValue. And since this is a float, and this is also expecting a float, this should work perfectly. Now let's save this. There's only one more thing that we have to do now. In UI Builder, what we did not set was the actual range here. Obviously, we could have done this in the script, but I want to keep the script very simple for now. Now here we have our low and our high value. And for a width, I don't know, let's say we want to have this between 10 and 400, for example. And let's let the initial value be, I don't know, somewhere in the middle. So this will be just the range for our width, right? I hope that that's clear. Now our width can be between 10 pixels and 400 pixels. And so now save that. Let's go back to our game view and in our inspector. Now let's remove the old text script and let's find the slider script. And that should be enough. Now when we enter play mode, you can see we can actually resize our box beautifully. And that is something. Now, obviously, you could do all other sorts of stuff with your slider, and the general approach would be to register some callback for your changes, and then you can do whatever you want with this new value property that you get here. So let's just go back, see this again. Now, I hope that was useful. We covered quite a lot of stuff here. We saw how those more complex controls are working, how we can actually access them in UI Builder, that they are actually not, that you cannot modify their internal hierarchy just right here, but you can attach style sheets and custom styles to the classes and IDs that they are that they are exposing. Then we saw how you can use the UI Toolkit debugger. Mostly for me, this worked much better when I was using the game mode and then choosing my panel here, and then I could only inspect those elements that I actually wanted to inspect. And then we saw how to actually provide some functionality for a more complicated element like the slider here. Now we are now going to try and use some of the things we learned in this controls section in our running example in our project, sort of, and then move on to the next topics.